The reinforced steel gate, an absurdly anachronistic barrier in this suburban sprawl, slid open with a low, hydraulic sigh. Beyond it, Elias Thorne's smart home loomed, a monument to digital paranoia and architectural minimalism. Glass and polished concrete, sharp angles reflecting the overcast sky, it looked less like a residence and more like a high-tech bunker disguised as a gallery. Even from the driveway, I could sense the layers of security, a digital skin meant to repel the outside world. I had been called in pro bono, a quiet request from an old contact who'd sensed something amiss despite the official narrative. Elias Thorne, the reclusive tech mogul, dead by his own hand. Suicide. The newspapers had already run with it, citing the pressures of his industry, the recent controversies surrounding his data privacy protocols. A convenient narrative, tidy and easily digestible. But tidy wasn't a word I associated with death, especially not with a man like Thorne, whose life was a meticulously controlled algorithm. The front door, thick and silent, was ajar, held open by a yellow evidence marker. Inside, the air was still, sterile, tinged with the faint, metallic scent I knew too well, now competing with the sharp tang of cleaning agents. The initial response team had been thorough, perhaps too thorough, eager to clear a high-profile scene. I saw the faint outlines of their boot covers on the pristine white floor, the careful placement of evidence tags, a testament to standard procedure. But standard procedure often overlooked the subtle, the inconvenient. Grant. Didn't expect to see you here. The lead detective, a man named Miller with a perpetually tired gaze and a reputation for closing cases quickly, emerged from the main living area, peeling off latex gloves. His skepticism was palpable, a wall I was accustomed to encountering. It's open and shut. Textbooks. Pressure's got to him. Happens all the time with these tech types. I offered a slight nod, already scanning the vast, open-plan space. So I read. My understanding was there were a few unusual elements. Unusual elements? A man shoots himself, Grant. What's unusual about that? Miller gestured vaguely towards the scene. We've got the weapon, the note, clear trajectory. No forced entry. Biometrics confirmed it was him in the house. His system locked down from the inside. Nothing to see here but a tragedy. Perhaps, I murmured, walking past him into the main living area, my gaze sweeping across the scene. The room was expansive, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the manicured grounds. In the center, a minimalist white sofa, and on the floor beside it, the dark, telltale stain. The body had already been removed, but the outline, marked with white tape, remained. A single bullet casing lay near the sofa's leg, tagged. My eyes narrowed. The weapon, a high-caliber handgun, was resting on a low, glass-top coffee table a few feet from where Thorne's body had been. Its placement struck me as deliberate. Almost staged. A suicide, particularly one involving such a brutal method, rarely left things so neatly arranged. There should have been a violent expulsion of force, a flailing, a desperate last act. The gun, I imagined, should have been closer to the body, perhaps even clutched, or flung away. Not resting politely on a surface like a discarded remote control. The weapon placement, I began, my voice quiet, it's a little neat, wouldn't you say? Miller scoffed. Adrenaline. Shock. People do strange things. He put it down after, or it fell. We've got prints, his prints. On the grip. And the spatter? I asked, kneeling beside the outline. I ran a gloved finger lightly along the floor, then stood, examining the pristine white wall behind where the head would have rested. For a close-range gunshot wound to the head, there's an almost peculiar lack of arterial spray, of brain matter, beyond the immediate impact zone. The walls are surprisingly clean. Miller shifted his weight, clearly annoyed. We cleaned some of it. Biohazard team. Standard procedure. Before a full forensic sweep? I queried, turning to face him. Or after? The primary spatter patterns tell a story. This story feels incomplete. My eyes moved from the floor to the low, sleek ceiling, then back to the coffee table. Then there was the suicide note. It lay on a tablet, propped against a sculptural lamp on a side table. The screen displayed a meticulously typed message, eloquent, remorseful, detailing his struggles with the pressures of his role. It was signed with a digital signature, confirmed as his. The note, I continued, my gaze fixed on the screen. It's almost too perfect. The phrasing, the tone. It reads like a press release, not a desperate final farewell. He was a CEO, Grant. He spoke in corporate jargon, Miller countered, his voice edged with impatience. He was known for being a recluse, a control freak. Even in death, he'd want to control the narrative. Makes sense to me. I walked over to the tablet, careful not to touch it, observing the angle, the way it was displayed. A man in the throes of a suicidal crisis, I reasoned, rarely took the time for such careful presentation, for such polished prose. Desperation was messy, raw. This was polished, almost theatrical. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the hum of the house's unseen systems. Miller watched me, his expression a mixture of exasperation and grudging curiosity. He knew my reputation, knew that when I saw a knot, I picked at it until it unraveled. And I was seeing knots everywhere. The weapon, so carefully placed. The understated spatter. The note, a perfect epitaph. It was all too neat, too convenient. The scene screamed for a quick conclusion, a narrative that fit the public's perception of a broken tech titan. But my gut, a finely tuned instrument honed by years of sifting through the debris of human tragedy, told me a different story. This wasn't just a man who had succumbed to pressure. This was a man whose death had been meticulously curated, a final act in a play written by someone else. And I intended to find the playwright. The complex web of digital and physical evidence, I knew, was just beginning to reveal itself. The sterile hum of the forensic lab was a stark contrast to the opulence of Thorne's penthouse. Here, under the unforgiving glare of the microscope, the narrative of a self-inflicted demise began to fray. My gloved fingers carefully manipulated the stage, bringing into focus a minute collection of fibers clinging to the cuff of Thorne's silk robe. They were unusual, a synthetic blend I didn't immediately recognize, certainly not from any fabric found within the meticulously catalogued contents of his home. And beside them, almost invisible, were specks of fine, reddish-brown dust, like pulverized terracotta, utterly out of place in a high-rise dwelling of glass and polished steel. Thorne's environment was pristine, almost hermetically sealed. These foreign elements were trespassers, silent witnesses whispering of an external presence. "Get me a full spectral analysis on these," I instructed a colleague, pointing to the samples. "And cross-reference with known industrial and construction materials. Focus on anything with high heat tolerance, unusual dyes." My mind raced. A man ending his own life, particularly one as fastidious as Thorne, typically didn't track in foreign particulate matter moments before. It suggested movement, interaction with an environment far removed from his controlled sanctuary. The deliberate staging of the tablet, the carefully chosen words, it felt less like a desperate final act and more like a performance, and these fibers were the loose threads on the costume. Next, I turned my attention to the digital footprint. The smart home system, vaunted as impenetrable, was Thorne's digital fortress. But fortresses, I knew, often had overlooked back doors. I brought in a cybersecurity specialist, a sharp-eyed individual known for dismantling the most complex networks. He set up his portable workstation, a constellation of blinking lights and humming servers, connecting directly to Thorne's central hub. Hours later, the specialist leaned back, pushing a hand through his already disheveled hair. "Access logs are clean. Almost too clean. No external breaches, no unauthorized entries." He gestured to a series of timestamps on his screen. "But look here. Not enough to trigger an alarm, but enough to indicate a temporary, very localized bypass. Like a brief, almost imperceptible surge that allowed a momentary override of a single sensor, then reset itself." My gaze sharpened. "A window?" "A pinhole," he corrected, "but a window nonetheless. Someone knew how to exploit a specific vulnerability, bypass a single motion sensor, perhaps, without alerting the main system. And then, the logs were scrubbed of any direct interaction with that particular sensor. It's like a phantom limb operation on the data." The suicide narrative crumbled further. A man in despair didn't orchestrate a sophisticated digital bypass. An intruder did. The wound itself was another anomaly. The initial report chalked it up to a self-inflicted gunshot, consistent with the weapon found clutched in Thorne's hand. But I wasn't satisfied. I engaged a ballistic analyst, a veteran with an encyclopedic knowledge of projectile trajectories and impact dynamics. He meticulously examined the entry point, the residue, the angles. "The trajectory is consistent with the weapon," the analyst stated, his voice devoid of emotion, "but the angle of entry. It's precise. Too precise for a struggle, too deliberate for an unpracticed hand aiming at oneself. It suggests a very specific, controlled presentation of the weapon, almost as if it were held by someone else, or braced against a fixed point, then fired. And the powder residue pattern," he continued, pointing to magnified images, "it's slightly asymmetrical, inconsistent with a direct, perpendicular shot from the weapon at that range if fired by the victim himself. It suggests a subtle, almost imperceptible rotation, or a slight shift in the weapon's position at the moment of discharge. As if the hand holding it wasn't Thorne's." My gut tightened. The pieces were beginning to align, forming a chilling picture. The foreign trace evidence, the digital ghost in the machine, the precise wound angle, all pointed away from suicide, towards a meticulously planned execution. An intruder, skilled and knowledgeable, had exploited a digital vulnerability, entered Thorne's sanctuary, staged the scene, and then vanished, leaving behind only the most subtle of contradictions. The pressure mounted swiftly. Thorne's board, powerful figures accustomed to control, demanded a swift conclusion. The media, fueled by public fascination with the reclusive tech mogul, clamored for answers, eager to solidify the narrative of a brilliant mind buckling under pressure. My superiors, facing the political heat, urged me to expedite my findings, to confirm the initial assessment, but I couldn't. The evidence wouldn't let me. I began to reconstruct the crime, envisioning the intruder's movements. The pinhole window of opportunity, the precise staging, the careful cleanup, it spoke of someone who knew Thorne, knew his habits, and crucially, knew his security system. Thorne's inner circle became my focus, his executive assistant, his head of security, a few trusted board members. People with intimate knowledge of his routines, his vulnerabilities, and potentially, his secrets. My investigation took an unexpected turn when, while reviewing old digital correspondence from a decade prior, a name surfaced. A distant relative Thorne had reportedly supported financially, a relative with a brief, almost forgotten history. The address listed for this individual pointed to an obscure locale. I needed to know more about this connection, to understand if there was any unresolved history, any motive lurking in the past. The address led me to the edge of the city, to a place shunned by time. The building stood like a forgotten sentinel, its brick facade crumbling, windows staring blankly. This was the psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records. Rows of rusted filing cabinets lined the walls, their drawers stiff with neglect, overflowing with the faded lives of those committed to its care. Cobwebs draped like macabre lace from the high ceilings, and the floorboards creaked under my weight, protesting my intrusion. I pulled on a pair of gloves, the rubber snapping against my wrist, and began to search, guided by the name I'd found in Thorne's old files. I sifted through brittle documents, handwritten notes, sepia-toned photographs of solemn faces. It was a slow, painstaking process, the kind of grunt work that often yielded nothing, but sometimes, a single detail could crack a case wide open. After nearly an hour, tucked away in a folder labeled with a family name I recognized, I found it, a transfer document for Thorne's distant relative, detailing a sudden, unexplained discharge years ago, signed by an administrator whose name I recognized from Thorne's current corporate board. The discovery sent a shiver down my spine. The meticulous CEO, the impenetrable security, the staged suicide, and now, a hidden connection to a forgotten past, linking him not just to an old facility, but to someone within his most trusted circle. The mystery had just deepened, and the clock was ticking faster than ever. My gut tightened. An intruder, skilled and knowledgeable, had exploited a digital vulnerability, and I was staring at the last, most stubborn piece of the puzzle, the rare, shimmering dust I'd painstakingly collected from Thorne's clothing. Back in my lab, the spectral glow of the electron microscope illuminated the sample. This wasn't just any dust. Its composition was utterly alien to Thorne's pristine smart home. Microscopic analysis revealed a complex lattice of exotic polymers and trace rare earth elements, unlike anything in any commercial database. It pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible luminescence under specific wavelengths, a signature I recognized from a fringe journal article years ago, a theoretical material, then, for high-density energy storage, rumored to be incredibly difficult to synthesize. It screamed experimental. It screamed secret. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. Thorne. Reclusive. Obsessive. The pieces clattered into place. He wasn't just a CEO, he was a titan of innovation, often pushing boundaries. There had been whispers, fleeting mentions in old tech forums before his rise to prominence, about a pet project, something he'd poured personal funds into, far from corporate oversight. A black box initiative. My eyes drifted to the reconstructed timeline on my monitor. The digital ghost, that sliver of anomalous data, had allowed a brief, undetectable bypass of Thorne's security systems just minutes before his death. It wasn't a hack from outside, it was an internal key repurposed. But to what end? And how did this dust connect? I cross-referenced Thorne's known associates, his past investments, any property he owned that wasn't public knowledge. My search algorithm, tweaked to hunt for obscure terms related to exotic material science and abandoned properties, finally spat out a single, unexpected hit, a dormant LLC, registered years ago under a shell company, linked to a disused industrial site. The address led to an old, forgotten section of the city, dominated by derelict structures. Specifically, a psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records. My breath hitched. This was it. The journey there was a descent into urban decay. Rusting gates groaned open, revealing a crumbling facade choked by ivy. The air grew heavy with the smell of damp concrete and forgotten things. The psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records loomed, a skeletal monument to a past I didn't care to unravel. Each creak and groan of the decaying structure echoed the urgency in my chest. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of my boots on debris and the distant wail of a siren from the living city. Dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering through grimy panes. I followed the coordinates Thorne's digital ghost had subtly hinted at, a sub-level access point, hidden behind a collapsed section of wall. It was precisely the kind of place Thorne, paranoid and secretive, would choose for an illicit project. The entrance was tight, leading to a cramped, low-ceilinged space. The air here was thick with the same metallic, slightly acrid scent I detected on Thorne's clothing. This was the source. This was where the dust originated. This was Thorne's secret project. On one of the workbenches, beneath a layer of fine, luminous dust identical to what I'd found on Thorne, lay a series of schematics. They detailed a device, revolutionary and terrifying in its implications, a neural interface, capable of bypassing human cognition, subtly influencing decisions. And beside them, a set of access logs, meticulously kept, detailing who had entered this clandestine lab. Thorne's name appeared frequently, as did one other, the chief technology officer, a man named Henderson. Henderson. Thorne's right hand, his most trusted confidant, the architect of Thorne's public persona and the public face of his company's innovations. The man who had been the most vocal proponent of the suicide theory. The unexpected perpetrator. The pieces snapped together with a sickening finality. Henderson wasn't just a colleague, he was deeply involved in this project. The log showed his presence here just days before Thorne's death. The motive began to coalesce, sharp and clear, professional betrayal, fueled by personal ambition. Thorne, I now understood, was likely on the verge of exposing Henderson's manipulation of the neural interface project, perhaps even selling off the technology to a rival, cutting Henderson out. The digital ghost was a backdoor Henderson had likely built into Thorne's smart home, a contingency for this very project, a secret shared only between the two of them. I reconstructed the night in my mind's eye. Henderson, knowing Thorne's routines, used the digital ghost to gain entry. A confrontation ensued, likely about the project, about Thorne's impending decision to cut Henderson loose, to expose his unethical practices. In the struggle, the rare dust, clinging to Henderson's clothes from his recent visit to the abandoned wing, transferred to Thorne. Then, the meticulous staging, arranging the scene to mimic suicide, manipulating the smart home logs, knowing exactly how Thorne would have operated, leaving just enough false data to point to self-destruction. I called Henderson. My voice was calm, steady. "We need to talk," I told him. "About Thorne's final hours. I've found something new." We met in a sterile, impersonal conference room at the precinct. Henderson sat across from me, impeccably dressed, his posture betraying no hint of the monstrous secret he carried. He offered a polite, almost practiced smile. "More inconsistencies, Grant? You've seen it, of course. Standard forensic sweep missed its significance. But its unique composition, its faint luminescence, tells a story." Henderson's smile wavered. His eyes flickered, just for a fraction of a second, to the image. "Dust? From where?" "From Thorne's secret project," I stated, watching his face. "The neural interface. The one you were secretly developing with him, out of corporate view. The one located in the psychiatric hospital abandoned wing with old records." His jaw tightened. The composure began to crack. "That's preposterous. Thorne was a visionary, but he wasn't involved in anything so. Including a visit just 2 days before Thorne's death." I paused, letting the implication hang. "The dust on Thorne, it matches samples taken directly from the synthesis chambers in that abandoned wing. It transferred to him during a struggle." "A struggle with you." I laid out the timeline, the digital ghost, the precise window of entry, the manipulated smart home logs that only someone intimately familiar with Thorne's routines and security architecture could have faked so perfectly. The wound angle, Chief Technology Officer, was never self-inflicted. It was delivered with force, by someone directly in front of him. Someone he trusted. Someone he was about to expose. Henderson's face drained of color. "After everything I built with him." The confession tumbled out, a torrent of resentment, betrayal, and desperate fear. He described the confrontation, the sudden, violent act, and the painstaking staging to make it look like Thorne's own despair. The room fell silent, heavy with the weight of his words. Justice, meticulous and unyielding, had found its mark. Thorne's name would be cleared, the stain of suicide washed away by the truth. As the investigators moved in to apprehend Henderson, I felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about accolades, but about seeing what others missed, about the silent narratives told by the smallest, most overlooked fragments of evidence. The dust, the ghost, the wound, they had all spoken, and I had been listening.